Hello. So we're back still working on the landers. And as you saw in the previous times, we've tried various values for our PID and we've had various success and not so success. Part of the problem is that we have no idea what the history of our flight is because we have no telemetry data. So we spent the week fixing that. But before we get into that, let me just show you a taste of this. I think this is the launch that happened the day before I met the guy who worked on this project.
Okay, now I can hear it.
Lots of hissing.
Oh.
It's like a Wookiee.
Oh.
I know, it's sad.
Call 911.
And there's a little. And then they're like, "Hey, Bob, you forgot your stuff on the chair." Did you hear him? Where's the guy? Doe. He literally said doe. Here it is again.
We're gonna stand down.
It was all official until it went all kablooey. Well, they did eventually get it, put out, right?
Oy. Okay.
So, it was clearly not his best day. So, what we're really doing, though, is we're going to get some data so we can figure out why our rocket did something like that. And unfortunately, my wife earlier today informed me she had a bad dream about a black box.
Oh, I can't believe it.
And traditionally, the thing in aviation that records data, it's either the flight data recorder or the voice recorder, it's referred to as a black box.
Right.
They call it that because no one is allowed to get into it. It's got a connection on the back. You plug it in. The only people that are supposed to look at it are the
It
officials.
doesn't have anything you can push to fix things.
No, it has no user interface whatsoever. No, because it's just a box to shove in and record, and then you pull it out, or you find it at a crash scene. And it's painted bright orange so that you can find it. So it's ironically the black box has always been orange. That's the joke of the Logger Plus being called the orange black box. So what this is a mod created by two other folks, S. Flanker and another name that is serious, WNP78. Sounds like a shortwave handle.
Right.
Which might be. So anyway, it had a feature where it would if you named your variable log underscore, it would automatically send out the updates as it was updated. And then Flanker added the ability to save it to file. Now, both of those schemes included some extra information, a timestamp in the case of one, which is useful in some situations. In my situation, I was looking for just a clean output. So I went ahead and got the mod, got it installed, all that kind of thing, and modified it to where it just, whatever you put in the log file or the log line is what it logs in the file. And there's no extra decoration or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And that allows me to create a very simple, what is referred to as a comma delimited file for the actual data.
What is it?
Comma delimited file.
Comma
delimited. So you'll see what that means here shortly. Right. Luckily, engineers are very straightforward in their naming of things,
Yes,
so,
I do know.
To start off with, we, besides bringing the mod and my slight change to it, what I eventually want to do is go ahead and add a switch to it. So here's our orange black box that we installed in our spacecraft, conveniently not taking up any space from the fuel tank, somehow. But in any case, it has a location that you can put for the file name, and how often you would want to send data over the network. And I guess the original creator of this had an application that would receive data from the network and display it. And so it was convenient to use this kind of network transfer. I like the file format so that I can just run a bunch of tests and then go back to the files to do the analysis after the fact. So the program is pretty straightforward for this. All it basically says is wait 8 seconds, put into the log altitude above ground level, comma, engine thrust, comma, mass, and then forever, log the combination of the altitude AGL, the performance engine thrust, and the performance mass. This format statement, where it's a 0:E,
Yeah. What is that?
that tells it to put it into scientific notation. And I do that because that way they're all the same size.
What do you call those? Squiggly brackets?
Curly braces.
Oh, curly braces. I knew it was something like that.
And you'll see that here's the comma in this text as well. So the curly brace is a way of abbreviating how you want the data to look, and then here's the actual data.
Yeah.
And so then you want a comma in between each one of them, except not the last one. So that's a comma delimited format. You delimit the data with a comma in between each one. It's the most common file format for data. Almost every tool can read it. So we also have a way of receiving a message, which was interesting to work on this little message send-receive system they have, which is essentially just whatever message. It's how do you say it? It's basically a name-value pair. The name is whatever you put in here, and the value is whatever the data is. So on the other side, we send broadcast message named notes with whatever data we want this one to have. This one receives the message, and in this case, it just puts out notes, whatever data we sent over. And this is so that at the top line of our data file, we have some information about what was the flight that generated this data. So, long story short, we're going to start generating some data. So first I'll show you real quick. Go back to the other one. The main program. So the main program, you remember we were jumping up into the sky and trying to hover, right? That was our original goal. Jump up into the sky to 5,000, hover for a time, and then safely descend and land. That's been pretty much the goal of the hopper right now.
Right.
So here's pretty much the same program we used before, except we're setting our target altitude to 5,000. We broadcast the message notes to the craft, meaning all other processors in the craft. This is what I made the mistake of earlier. You can broadcast a message which apparently will broadcast to the same application, which I don't know, not sure how that's different from a global variable, but it might be useful.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can broadcast a message to every processor in the craft, which is what we're using here for.
Every processor in the craft. That sounds like a lot more than the one.
Well, we have a processor in our parachute that decides when our parachute goes off, right? So we could technically send it a message.
Oh, I get it. I get it.
And then we've got a processor in.
I get it.
Right, and so this is how all these different systems would interact in a normal, more complex system, right?
Right.
You have to have some sort of messaging, network messaging usually. There's all sorts of complicated messaging systems that are to guarantee delivery and all this. When you're talking over, wires that might have noise on them and all that physical reality problems. Here, the messages are guaranteed, of course, because it's all simulation. Although that might be something you could throw in here. Your messages got garbled. What do you do now? But in any case. So we've got our target altitude. We send that note message off. We set our variable throttle all the way up. Lock our heading, do our countdown. And then we activate stage, and then we're going to use the target apoapsis ascent logic. Remember, we had these various different ways of deciding how to get to that 5,000 feet, right, or 5,000 meters. There's the fire until you're almost there and then cut off your power and coast the rest of the way. That's this one. Then there's the use the same kind of PID logic we use to control our hover to get up there in a nice smooth arc like that, which takes a lot more fuel, obviously. So I like this one because it's a much more straightforward. There's actually only one variable in this, which is at what point do you decide to stop firing the engine at full blast, right? It's a very simple logic. If my apoapsis is beyond the target altitude times some multiple, in this case times 1, then I cut off the throttle. Now, I'm blasting up through the atmosphere. The atmosphere is still thick down at that low. So my target apoapsis becomes 5,000. This logic falls through or becomes true. So I cut off the throttle. And then I'm going to wait for my velocity to become less than 0, which means I'm falling. So that's how I know I'm done coasting to the top of the arc, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because I cut it off right at the apoapsis of 5,000 and I still have air resistance, I'm not going to make it to 5,000, right?
Right.
So this should maybe be 2, or maybe not. So that's what we want to find out. Is how do we make this number such that we fire and we cut off just before we have enough coasting speed to end right at our target altitude, or at least get pretty close. So the only real intelligent way to do that is to collect some data, do some tests, right? And then do some analysis, make a change, collect the data again, compare the data, see if we get closer, worse, better. It's like the old eye doctor, better, worse, better, worse. Let me just stick a bunch of pre-made lenses in front of your face, see which one works. Wasn't exactly rocket science, right? But still, it's all the same steps. Do a test, collect some data based on your knowledge of that data, figure out what to do next. So, thanks to some work of some others, we have this logger that we can use. So, in this case, we're just going to do it to 1. So let's go ahead and take off and collect our data. We'll save where we're at the moment. And then while we head out to the launch pad, hello everyone. As we head out to the launch pad, let's, I think we've seen this more than a few times now, but we're going from a nice clean launch pad this time, no extras. Up we go. There, we got some rocket noise now.
Yeah.
Alright, good. Can't live without the rocket noise forever. So, one of the things you'll see now is we have this flight log file. And this is the flight log. What I also did was I made it to where the file that it opened wasn't just the name that I gave it, but it's the name dash 2020, year, month, day, hour, minute, second, .csv.
Yes, it works.
And then that way, every time I launch this thing, I get a new file for each launch, right?
Right.
And I don't have to go back and move things around. It just automatically logs, right?
It works.
So here we are. We can't preview the file because it's still writing to it in the game. So we're gonna just cruise out this road. So let's see. Let's kick back over to this view. So I got some more space here. So you can see our lovely altitude gauge right here.
Yeah.
We're trying to tickle that 5,000 level. We're only 2 meters a second, and so you can see up there at our target. Now we're targeting 0 AGL because we've already run low on fuel and we are heading back down.
Right back to the thing. You like to do that, right?
Look down. Ah, here we go. So one thing I
But
looked
it's gonna
up,
smack down like an Elon Musk mobile.
pretty close. That's pretty much the goal here. Is it's a hopper, so you know you want to be able to retro fire land, and there goes the throttle retro firing. So just before it fired, it was going 158 meters per second towards the Earth, or the Drew. Which I had to go look up. That equates to 350 miles an hour.
Oof.
It was going 350 just before it fired those retro rockets at 700 meters and managed to land safely.
Well, that's good.
So
I don't see any other dead ones around there.
no, we cleaned up all the other dead ones.
Good for you.
So the other thing is I get to just undo flight over and over again because I don't have to keep them around to look at them later because the data's already external.
Right?
So let's go back over to the big view. We'll mute the game for the moment. So now here's our data, right? The notes that came across, target APO is ×1 at 5,000 meters. Altitude, and we get all these various data values. And the reason I used scientific notation was so that you'd have them all nice and neat in a row, and they wouldn't be all, you know, various length and all that kind of thing. What that also means is that if you did this in a real system, in a real-time system, and this was coming over a serial port that will still be going at 115,200 baud, okay? That's the embedded space is all like that. But the most reliable form of communication from an embedded hardware target to your desktop is going to be a serial port, RS-232, maybe 435, but rarely. And if you send out the same amount of data for every sample, which is, you know, one row here is a sample. If you send out that same amount of data for every sample, then if there is a distortion in or an effect caused by the delay that it is necessary to send out your data, if that causes a delay in the system, this is a consistent delay. Something that you might be able to find in the operational. If you're sending out a varying length,
you might be able to find it, BitFlipper.
Well, so unfortunately F1 is tied into help and it keeps popping up a dialogue. But in any case, so here's our data. That's lovely, and now we have it, but we want to look at it. But before we look at it, let me just take one note. There's these three values here, but they're really, really far off from each other, right? So this first value is your altitude above ground level. It starts at 6.9 meters, right? So that's E times 0. And it goes up into the 5,000 meter range, which is E with 3 zeros. So again, to review the scientific notation, what the plus 003 means is take that decimal place and move it over 3 spots.
Yeah.
And then you get the actual number that you're used to seeing, 5,498.6. I'm trying to put the cursor underneath the number I'm talking about here. I guess, well, I can't highlight it.
666.
Yeah, well, no, not the 666 one. So, but these numbers that are used for the thrust, they get up into the 10 to the plus 5, right? So they're 2 orders of magnitude bigger than the other numbers that we're typically playing with. And that'll come into play here in a second. So the first thing we want to do, we want to start visualizing this so that we can actually determine what the hell's happening. So we'll start off with, well, I have Open Office installed, Open Office 4. And this opens up Open Office Calc, which is the Open Office version of Excel. If you have Excel, it'll do pretty much the same thing. So it comes up and it says you want to import this text import. You want to bring in this text file. This is also why I called it a .csv for comma separated values file, because that's automatically recognized by Open Office and it will do this kind of stuff for us. Of course, it can delineate. You can use any delimiter you wanted to. You could use colons or tabs or whatever, but most commonly it's comma. And there's some other features here we don't really need to deal with because it's all numbers. We do have to use this detect special numbers, otherwise it won't recognize scientific notation. Found that out after much frustration. So now we have all our import ready to go. Go ahead and import it. Now we've got this nice spreadsheet. We could do some math over stuff, do this kind of thing where you highlight some huge thing like that and it gives you some totals and so on. We could do that, but clearly it's easier to see what's going on by graphing the data. And luckily, they make it pretty easy. So we will insert a chart. It'll automatically grab most of what we need to do, and it will bring up the chart wizard.
Wow.
So we want it to be lines. We want it to be, continuous lines, not individual points, right? And then we want to maybe do smooth lines just because.
There's smooth lines.
And now there's a couple of things here. You'll notice in the background here it says the notes, target, and engine thrust and mass. So it's all off, right? That's not what it's supposed to be.
Times 1 at.
So we want it to ignore this first line, is what it amounts to. So this specification here is a little bit annoying to me, but it's somewhat similar in Excel. It's $ sheet 1, right? That's the name of the sheet. Then dot, and then $A, which is the column, $1, which is the row, all the way over to column C, row 166, which I guess there's 166 samples. So we had it putting out a sample once a second. So to skip that first row, we just have to take from A1 instead to A2. And now we have altitude, thrust, and mass, which is what we were looking for, right? So we'll let all of this take the defaults. Like I said, it's fairly intelligent. The only thing I might want to do is I want to put the legend down on the bottom there so we have a little bit more space left to write. And then we're pretty much finished with the chart wizard. Go ahead and move this where it's a little more visible. So, see where this is 10 to the 5?
Yeah.
Because this line is the engine thrust. So if we get down here, you can see the little tiny blue line is the altitude. So luckily we can say put that on a secondary y-axis. And so that brings it up into 10 to the 3rd. So everything with the blue line is read off of this side. And you can see there's our target 5,000 AGL is where we were hovering here. So engine thrust kicked on, right? We jumped up, we went to full engine thrust, we scaled back a little, balanced off, and then dropped off. And in that time frame, our altitude went to here. So because these samples are all lined up, we can see this is where we cut off our thrust at altitude 700 meters or so.
Right.
Because we read the altitude from this scale and the engine thrust from the one way over there. And then we also want to do this with our mass, because our mass is in that 10 to the 3rd range, so we'll put that on the secondary axis. And as you can imagine, our mass did nothing but slowly decrease, right? We were sitting there, we fired our engines, the red line goes up, our mass starts going down, we cut off our engines, our mass stays the same, while we coast up to this altitude, which we didn't quite make it. Where are we? About 4,000, I'd say? Where's this cursor at? Around about 4,000 is where we topped off.
Yeah.
Off of our first attempt to just throttle up.
Yeah.
And then we kicked into the mode of trying to hover at 5,000, right? But we were at 4,000. So it immediately kicked on the thrust. But very briefly cut off the thrust as we then coasted above 5,000, right? So we get this kind of like sad elephant looking chart here. Okay. There he is. He's all droopy with his trunk. All right. Well,
There'll be a loud sneeze in the future.
there may be a sneeze shortly. Ginger ale. Mmm.
Don't choke on.
Oh, I'm really gonna have to change it from the F1 key. The help keeps popping up. So, I think, where were we? Okay, we were looking at our altitude dropping every time we turned on our engine, right?
Oh, it's funny.
That made sense. We got to here. All right, then we put on our thrust again. We busted over 4,000, and then we kind of landed. Here we were trying to hover at 5,000. And you can see our engine thrust did the same thing. You know, we were above 5,000, so we were accelerating toward it. Just as we were accelerating toward it, we put on full thrust to slow ourselves down, and then we put in less and less thrust. So these values that you see here, and especially these in the wiggly part of our landing sequence, that's the values coming out of that PID algorithm. And so you can tune how much variability you get in this part of the algorithm by adjusting the P, the I, and the D values. You can also tune them if you can collect some data about what exactly you need to do to tune them, and you're not just shooting in the dark. So that's our goal. We've got our first batch of data. This is if we target our target altitude on ascent. So this first part of the thrust curve, this thrust curve would cut off when our target apoapsis was 5,000. Now we're going to change it. We're going to make it like, let's see, what would we make it? Last time we landed at a little below 4,000. We're targeting 5,000. So that's roughly 1,000 out of 5. So that's a 20% increase, or 20% difference. So instead of targeting 100% of our target, let's target 120% of our target, perhaps. So let's try that. That'll be quick.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the good things about these flights. They're all fairly quick. Now let's make sure that we synchronize our notes in our file with our actual values that we used in our flight.
Right.
And this is where, you know, this would be better to be a variable that you set in one place, and therefore it's used.
It would go over.
It's the same everywhere it's used.
Yeah.
There's a number of ways to do that in the C language. That then there's only one way to do it in Visi, and I don't know if I want to overstress a single program at the moment. I'm not sure where the limits are as to how much in the way of variables and everything you can have. So now we're going to try with a 1.2 target. So 20% over 5,000 should be 6,000. I think, yes. Roughly speaking, yes, probably exactly speaking. But again, air resistance is not our friend. So let us be on to our flight line. Let's get back to the smaller window there. So again, we're just going to run through the flight sequence. Takes, 10 minutes? Well, we did definitely go a little higher that time before we cut our engine back. Keep forgetting the game sound. That's no fun.
Yeah, there's no games.
There we go. Oh, well, we were at about 4,005 this time when we fired the engines to try and hover at 5,000. So we're a good bit closer. We're at least 50% closer. So obviously this is not a linear problem, right? So maybe we add another 0.1. Maybe it'll be 1.3 this next flight. But let's see what kind of sad elephant, or maybe we get a rhino this time. I don't know what our AGL picture will look like. So I believe, I don't know, I haven't tried this yet. We run it at 2x speed, we should still be able to collect all the same data. So this is an experiment, experiment on the fly. Falling to the drew. Accelerating to 300-ish, 350-ish miles an hour.
Why is it going up through the... Is it coming back down?
Yeah.
Oh, it is coming back down.
Yeah, it falls through its own exhaust, actually.
Well, I missed the flight.
There'll be another. Don't worry. We got at least maybe one, maybe two more before we know what we're doing. All right. So here we have our new flight log, right? X at 1.2, still at 5,000. Double click on that and it wants to import a new one. So luckily most of what we did before is already saved. If you have any questions, you can pause at any time and find out what our settings were, hopefully. I'm not covering anything up critical. But it pretty much works the same. Now, I could, and maybe I will next time, show you how to set up the spreadsheet so that all you have to do is tell it to reload a file. It gets all the data and it automatically changes the chart, so you're not constantly dropping the chart over and over again. But for this exercise, it seems to be helpful. So once again, insert and the chart. And
Hi, everyone.
bring up the chart wizard. Line chart, smooth line chart. Next. Ignore the first line because that's got the wrong data in it. Right? Make sure first row as label is checked and first column as label is not. First row as label being the titles, altitude, and so on. So then we get our altitude, thrust, mass, and that's all set up for us automatically. Throw that on the bottom. Finish her out. And then here we go. We're going to bring these guys back to the secondary y-axis as our mass.
Oh,
So one of the downsides to this is not clicking right where you expect it to. There we go. Here's our different kind of elephant.
let's see.
So the blue line here is our altitude above ground level.
Elephant.
Still a bit of a humpy elephant, but we're above 4,000 instead of slightly below 4,000 when we fire our
It's almost 5. Yeah.
right? So we're getting pretty close. We don't want to make too big a change now. So just to give you a comparison, previous elephant, current elephant. If I do it fast enough, you can really see it almost animated. So, sadder,
Right?
happier elephant. What we want to actually do is get to a point where it just goes straight up, goes straight across, and comes straight down. We want it to not be an elephant at all. We want it to be this nice little table. And little trapezoidal kind of hill. Plus, see this big burn here that we're dropping all this fuel on. That means that we have less time to hover. We want to be able to maximize the hover time and not waste a bunch of fuel getting to altitude, which is what we're getting to altitude and then stable at 5,000. So clearly we need to add just a touch more. So maybe 1.3, maybe 1.33, because a third is a third, and computers can't do a third very well, so 1.333. Let's try something like that. 1 1/3 times the altitude. So we're firing up through the atmosphere. When our target apoapsis gets to 1.3 times what our target is, 30% more, then we'll cut our engine throttle, and that'll be this cut of this engine throttle right here. That's the event that we're talking about changing. And that way we'll have gone up and, I guess, look, it's Batman. Our thrust vector is Batman. Or rather, our thrust history is Batman. Alright, we're going to try it again for 1 333 to 33.
Alright.
Alright, let's go over there and do that. Let's make it 3 3s, just cause. And the reason we do this in computing is computing's being binary based and power of 2 based. It doesn't handle being divided by 3 very well. And so an actual third goes on forever in when it does the actual calculation. So we'll do it to 3 decimal places just to have a little bit more accuracy of being exactly 1 1/3. So that's pretty much all the change we were going to do, actually. Yeah, make sure that our target apo message and our wait until are there. Okay, save to craft, save the craft, saves the craft, overwrite to craft, take off to craft. So these other files, there it goes. There's our new file. All right. See how dramatical we can make it. No data for you. You just have to fly like you're just watching it fly. I have no idea how the performance is doing. Nor do we care, we just want to take a look at the mountains. So what would this be like as a tourist attraction, right? Like, not the 0 Gs, not all the way to space. No, we fly you up to 5 kilometers altitude and hover there for a few seconds. I don't know that this would be a particularly fun ride, but it's kind of like a really big version of those drop tower rides where they like drag you up all slow like and then play a bunch of games with your head about when they're going to drop you a little bit. Then talk about dropping you and then drop you a little bit. And then finally you drop all the way down and it's got some cables or whatever to slow you down just at the right time. I suppose this would be the rocket equivalent of that ride. So we'll see here shortly when we run out of fuel. Well, we can kind of tell already this flight has lasted longer and there wasn't that secondary super high powered long burn. Okay, here's our cutoff. And we've drifted a little bit in the wind. Yeah, we're falling faster than our smoke. Our exhaust is rising. We'll finish it off just like this. Oh wait, here we go. I hate that view. That's a good view. Oh, we've got some throttle up. Whee, gentle. See how the... So, we're not coming down as fast as we could. And that'll be are not a problem, but that'll be an issue later when we are trying to land our boosters. And we want to have as little fuel left in our booster, just the bare minimum needed to land properly. And because we want to use the rest of our fuel as a booster, yes? So, we're back on the ground. Let's go get our data. Again, same settings. We just double check here, it's the 1.333 version. Right? Okay to there. Here's our data. Insert chart. Chart wizard always comes up at below the screen for some reason. I don't know why.
Hello, everybody new in the room.
Lines and smooth lines and all like that. First row is column. Skip the first row. Let's see. Nexty. Put the legend on the bottom and the finish.
Put the legend on the bottom, put the legend on the bottom, put the legend on the bottom. Dance. Hey, that looks a lot better.
So, it looks a little better. This is just the thrust curve, right? That we're noticing right now, but you can see that we barely had to recover here. And of course, obviously, if you look at these 1,700 times a day, as the engineers at almost every rocket company ever has, all of these things are recognizable. They probably have names for this freaking Batman ear looking thing.
Of course they do.
And for all we know, it's Batman ears. There's our mass curve. Oh, look at that!
Ooh.
That's nearly a perfect headless elephant there.
Oh, hey,
right.
There you go. That's what you said you wanted,
That was
right?
the goal. Well, we cut off just slightly below 5,000, the target. You can see we actually stay at a pretty nice level here in the 5,000 range if we come up onto it. If we come down and land on it, the PID control loses over time, and we have this sort of this slow curve under this area as we lose mass. Of course, here is where we were looking at the cameras.
Right.
It ran a little longer. The data collection just continues until you end the flight. So that was the goal, and that's pretty much how you could use some actual data collection to, as they say, diagnosis, or rather, prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And in engineering, it's the same way. To prescribe a change without having the data to back it up is malpractice. It's engineering malpractice, not medical malpractice, but... And so you have to be able to get data out and be able to look at it after the fact and analyze it compared to other things and all like that. It looks like if we made this 1.3334, we might be right on the nose. And the problem, of course, with this methodology is I don't know if that's going to behave the same if we put it at 10,000, right? Yeah. Or 6,000 for that matter. If we target it now at 6,000, are we going to end up with the same curve, or are we going to end up with an elephant head? What do you think?
I don't know.
Take your bets, make your bets. Make your bets on the data. If we change our target to 6,000, leave everything else the same, are we going to end up with an elephant head or droopy head. Or a bumpy head?
I say we're going to end up with an elephant head.
Bumpy head, droopy head.
Droopy.
Droopy head, cut off too early?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's make that one change. We'll target 6,000 meters, and we'll see how that goes.
All right.
That should be a quick... well, all of it's a quick fix. That's one of the bonuses of this type of work. Is you can make just a quick change. And in fact, for all of that, all we have to do is say we want 6,000, and it flows throughout the rest, right? Because we're setting this one variable. Right then. We are off to fly the wizard. Back down to size. I don't know if it looks like I'm glancing all over the place or what exactly, but just to fill people in, I got a second monitor over here. And it's what's actually playing the game. And yet I'm trying to look this way so that I'm looking like I'm looking in the camera-ish. So I'm actually interacting with the broadcast screen instead of the game screen. Good thing I'm not trying to run real fast and shoot at people. Oh, cut off at about 2,000 meters this time. Let's see. So it's basically a race between the AGL and the surface speed. And we blew through 5,000. Oh wait, we're targeting 6, I forgot. Oh, how quickly we forget. So we're targeting 6,000, we're at 56 and we're 30 in the meters per second. So, oh, we got to 5,700. So, yep, it's a droopy elephant head.
Yep.
Yep. Because now we had to power up in order to get to 6,000, and now we've blown through
I'm
6,000.
smart. I'm not the thing that my husband in my dream called me.
I know, apparently, in her nightmare, I was not very helpful. And then, of course, I'm mad at you because you was mean to me in my dream.
Well, you said some horrible things to me.
In my dream.
My fake dream husband
Here,
said.
we finally land at 6,000, and we only got 2% of fuel left to hover with.
Oh, you do have...
And then notice we'll continue to fall down because of this current set of PID values. Doesn't do a great job of keeping us at our target altitude anyway. Here we go. Accelerating to the Earth. The Drew. We would be accelerating much faster were we on Earth. But I notice it maxes out. Oh, it says 163. But by the time, so it's at 163.
Yeah, 164.
165. Because we're high up and the atmosphere's thin. And we're actually hitting a sort of a terminal velocity because of the atmosphere.
Right.
Which every falling object through an atmosphere hits some terminal velocity. Depending on its shape and everything. Yeah, we're doing a lot more tweaking here, it looks like, on our landing. So, one of the weird little side effects of what we're doing here is the PID algorithm used for hover has internal values, right? All of these PID algorithms had their internal, the internal integer.
I see the throttle value changing quickly.
Right. So, here it'll be more obvious here in the program. So the PID algorithm has internal variables, right? And because we're only using one PID algorithm for hover, we're using the hover PID function. And the hover PID function has these internal variables, the previous error and the previous int. And since we're using this function for hover, and then we switch and start using it for descent, then the way it behaves in our descent is affected by these previous error and previous int, the ones that were there when we were trying to hover. Right? And so what we want to do is take all of these variables that are in the hover PID function and put them into a list so that we can reference the variables for each different stage or each different PID with a different list of variables so they don't interfere with each other.
Right.
And right now we've got a bit of interference. Our landing is interfered with by our hover stage. So I actually got some work done on the lists, but we'll get into that next time. I thought this was far more interesting to be able to actually see our data. So let us be over to that view. Bring open our next flight log. And again, everything's the same. Each stage, we just pretty much run through the same thing here. Except our target is 6,000 now. You predicted a droopy-headed elephant, yes? And actually, we could just chart the altitude AGL. We don't necessarily have to chart the thrust and everything, but since it's mostly automatic, might as well take advantage of it. There we are. Back to where you can see it. And altitude AGL is the blue line. Secondary axis. Ooh, not too droopy-headed. Not too horrendous. So
That's
obviously,
a lot better than I thought it was going to be.
It's not a completely linear function, right? So, and there's probably better mathematics, like your engine ISP and the time to altitude and some of these other things. There's probably a whole lot of better ways of calculating when or how much thrust you need to get to a particular altitude, and then firing for just that exact amount of thrust in this first stage here. What happened to our other Batman ear?
It disappeared.
It became to one-ear Batman for some reason. So this kind of variability, all these little wiggles in the line. In fact, let's one of the things you can do here is tell the line that you want it to be much thinner. And in doing so, you get to see a little bit more detail. So you see here's what I call the belly of the elephant. And this is when we go above our target altitude and we have to thrust briefly to land on that target altitude. Go ahead and put this guy on the secondary axis so that we can see the bottom line here. So you'll see this curve. This is our curve on takeoff, right?
Yeah.
And that's going full throttle until we reach our particular apoapsis. So from this whole segment, this first 16 samples or so, the 16 seconds or so, we were going full thrust, and we were rising as fast as we possibly could, right? And so we have this really sharp go from nothing to accelerating, right?
Right.
Over here, we're decelerating, trying to slowly land and touch the ground. So we have a much more narrow curve, if you will, a more gentle curve here in our landing. Now, obviously, we need to do that, and we would probably have to make that curve even more gentle if there were humans on board. Because, like I said, when we fire up this thruster right here, when we fire the engines at this altitude, we're descending at nearly 350 miles an hour. So if you went from 350 miles an hour to near dead stop in 2 seconds, that's going to be 9 Gs, 10 Gs. It's not going to feel nice. So if this were a human lander, we would want the thrust to kick in much earlier and much more gently, and this curve to be much more gentle like that kind of thing. Were there humans on board? So that's one of the other considerations that you'd have to take into account versus being able to do this in a simulator with a rocket that can deal with the 9 Gs. And of course, that means all of your hardware has to be tied up nicely so it won't fall off. So let's see, compared to our previous one. That's nice. I guess 2 Batman ear, 1 Batman ear. So this one was okay, so that was the ×1. Then this was the 1.2 ×1 ×1.2 ×1.33333. And then finally we went with 1.333 and targeted 6,000 instead of 5,000, and we ended up with our little elephant thing here again. So now, I guess it'd be 1.4 probably that would get you to 6,000 feet. And maybe somewhere you can figure out, okay, 6,000 feet's 1.4, 5,000 feet's 1.3. That's 0.1 per 1,000 feet above 5,000. So you could do some math. You could maybe get some ratio going. I suspect it would be highly tied to, the gravitational constant of the Earth, since this is all ballistics going straight up. And of course, atmospheric conditions and air thickness and so forth.
Alright.
So, what I had kind of wondered is where we're going next. The final goal is still to launch from Drew, automatically land a lander on Luna, on the far side of Luna. That's the end goal. We kind of got off on a hopper tangent because we're going to have to auto land, and we want to auto land our boosters. I'd rather auto land the boosters and get that down before we try and auto land something with more sensitive gear on board. Which is what will be on Luna, and of course this should all be much simpler on Luna with less gravity, right?
Alright.
But what it should actually all amount to is just a difference in those PID values. If we divide all the PID values by, the difference in gravity, in our case, the Earth versus the Moon is 1/6. So if we took our PID values and, made them 1/6 smaller, that should it's a good place to start.
Alright.
And then we would collect some data and we would tweak them. Yes? Now, the other reason I wanted to get into this about 5,000 versus 6,000 is space missions are still very much planned in advance. If 5,000 is the plan, that's what you're going to target. If 1.3 works for 5,000, you don't really care if it works for 6, because it's not a general purpose application. The mission is to take off, get to 5,000, and hover at 5,000. You figure out those numbers and you go with them, right? You don't have to come up with a generalized answer to every problem just to get the one problem or the one use case that you're working with operational. Now, if you can, that's helpful. That's actually how all these things blow up into research projects and become more generalized solutions. So the next couple episodes, we have a couple different ways to go. So we want to be able to auto-land our boosters, and that's pretty much the same code we've shown so far here in the hopper. I could perhaps show how I went about editing the mod, or modifying the mod, double modding the mod, whatever you want to call it. And I'd like to add it to where here in the game you have an option. So right now, if you grab the orange black box, you have this option for include log.
Yeah.
And I'd like to make another switch here that's include log no decoration, or include log clean, I don't know what we'd call it, plain, maybe.
Yeah.
Or include only log, something like that. Anyway, some sort of switch that would add this functionality to the existing mod, so that we don't lose anything. Right now I kind of went through and hacked it real quick, and lost the ability to do the rest of what it normally does. It's not a good thing. You want to keep adding functionality to the mod and not stripping it of things. So I could do a little show of doing that process, modifying a game. That would almost be learning as I go, because I've only done a bare minimum of work with modding, creating a mod, just like I said, this bit. But that might be helpful if you're interested in that. I'll, comment in the wherever you see this video, and let us know if you'd like to see how we go about making a mod for the game, or if you'd rather just keep moving on the rocket and keep moving on toward Luna. We're gonna need a bigger rocket. right? So the next stage, we'll go back to our triple core rocket that can get to Luna as it is. At least it can get to orbit, and but it can get to orbit with this really massive capsule, and we're going to replace that with a much lighter lander and things like that. So we'll have a few improvements to go. We actually won't really need the orange black box once we have figured out what our numbers need to be. For example, the boosters, right now we burn up the entire fuel in the boosters, right, as part of our launch profile. We're going to have to keep some percentage of fuel in the boosters if we're going to retro-land them. Now, the other problem is they're probably going to retro-land over the water and just sink into the water anyway. But we can at least pretend that we saved some money doing it. Eventually, the game's going to have that kind of complexity with any luck. So, one of the other things I'd like to do to this mod is I don't know why the orange black box is so humongous. It looks, you can see it in there.
Yeah.
It seems like a large orange black box. Now, I think they might have modeled it after one of the Apollo program objects, but in reality, these things are about yay wide and about yay tall. They're about yay long. They're essentially, I guess they'd be 2U or 3U, U being the standard unit of 10 centimeter cubes that is most of the satellite stuff is based on, or the micro satellite stuff is based on. So I think they're either considered a 3U box or a 6U box, and a 6U box is the same length and width, but twice or same depth and height, but twice the width. But they are only about, size of a loaf of bread-ish. This seems a lot bigger than a loaf of bread. And I'm sure the new ones are going to be even smaller. So again, let us know in the comments if you want to see modifying the game or moving on to our auto landing. And we will be getting in touch with you guys at a later date.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for hanging out with us.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take it, button, yeah.